Can one weekend movie make you question your own taste? Some films entertain you, but these ones ambush you, dragging you through violent twists, sick humor, nightmare logic, and scenes you may regret laughing at. This list is not about safe classics. It is about the movies people warn each other about afterward. Stay with each pick, because the wildest one does not just shock you, it dares you to keep watching. Number 15, Wild Things, 1998. A glossy thriller can smile at you while hiding a knife behind its back, and Wild Things does exactly that. On the surface, it looks like a steamy Florida crime story, built around wealth, temptation, and scandal. But the real hook is how fast the movie turns every truth into a trap. Matt Dillon plays a school counselor pulled into a dangerous accusation, while Kevin Bacon, Neve Campbell, Denise Richards, and Bill Murray move through the story like everyone knows more than they are saying. What makes this film so wild is not just the crime, it is the way the plot keeps folding back on itself, almost daring the audience to trust the wrong person. Director John McNaughton turns the sunny Florida setting into something poisonous, where swimming pools, courtrooms, police offices, and luxury homes all feel like pieces on a rigged board game. Every twist feels shameless, but that is the fun. Wild Things is trashy in the most calculated way. Slick, dangerous, and almost proud of how many times it tricks you before the credits stop rolling. Number 14, Weirdsville, 2007. Some movies go off the rails. Weirdsville starts in the ditch and somehow finds a secret tunnel underneath it. This strange Canadian dark comedy follows two reckless slackers whose bad choices pile up so quickly that the movie begins to feel like a cursed road trip through crime, panic, and pure bad luck. Scott Speedman and Wes Bentley play low-level troublemakers who are already in deep with a bizarre drug dealer, but things get even messier when a body, a drive-in theater, and a group of ritual-obsessed strangers collide in the same night. The magic of Weirdsville is that it never behaves like a normal crime movie. It has the ingredients of a thriller, the attitude of a stoner comedy, and the timing of a nightmare joke that keeps getting worse. Alan Moyle directs it with a grimy, oddball energy, making every new problem feel both dangerous and ridiculous. This is not a polished mainstream ride. It is a cult-flavored detour for viewers who like their weekend movies messy, unpredictable, and proudly strange. Number 13, The Signal, 2007. A television screen should not feel like a loaded weapon, but The Signal turns everyday technology into a doorway for madness. The film begins with a simple, terrifying idea. A mysterious broadcast starts infecting people through phones, radios, and television sets, pushing ordinary citizens into sudden violence and paranoia. What makes it so wild is the structure. Instead of telling the story in one clean line, the movie breaks itself into three different parts, each with a different tone, almost like The Signal is corrupting the film itself. One moment it feels like survival horror, the next it becomes pitch-black comedy, and then it slides into emotional nightmare territory. Directors David Bruckner, Dan Bush, and Jacob Gentry use the low-budget edge to their advantage, giving the movie a raw, unstable feeling, as if anything can happen at any second. There is something disturbingly modern about it too, because the fear is not only about violence, it is about what happens when people stop trusting what they see, hear, and believe. The Signal is not smooth or polite, but that is exactly why it works. It feels infected, unpredictable, and dangerous, like a midnight movie that grabs your attention with static and refuses to let go. Number 12, Thursday, 1998. Some crime movies walk into chaos slowly. Thursday kicks the door open with blood on its shoes. This underseen thriller follows Casey, a former Los Angeles drug dealer who has tried to bury his violent past and reinvent himself as a normal married man in Houston. For a while, his new life looks clean, quiet, and almost believable. Then an old criminal friend arrives with heroin, trouble, and the kind of bad timing that can ruin an entire life before lunch. What follows is a brutal, darkly funny chain reaction where every visitor brings a new threat, a new secret, or a new reason for Casey to panic. Thomas Jane gives the movie its exhausted center, while Aaron Eckhart brings a dangerous unpredictability that makes the story feel like it could explode in any direction. The film has the sharp, twisted attitude of late 90s crime cinema, the kind that clearly learned from Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs but still has its own nasty flavor. It is violent, strange, fast, and full of characters who seem allergic to making normal decisions. Thursday fits this list because it turns one man's attempt at peace into a full-blown criminal circus, proving that the past never knocks politely when it wants back in. Number 11, American Mary, 2012. The scariest thing about American Mary is not the surgery, it is how calmly the movie invites you into its underground world. Catherine Isabel plays Mary Mason, a medical student drowning in pressure, money problems, and professional humiliation. Then she discovers a hidden community willing to pay for extreme body modification, and suddenly her skills become valuable in ways no classroom ever prepared her for. What starts as desperation slowly mutates into power, revenge, and identity. The film, directed by Jen and Sylvia Soska, walks a strange line between body horror, dark satire, and character study. It is stylish without feeling clean, disturbing without becoming mindless, and oddly fascinating because Mary is not written as a simple victim or villain. She is someone pushed into a world that reflects the ugliness around her, then learns how to survive inside it. The movie's wildness comes from its confidence. It does not flinch from uncomfortable ideas about beauty, control, exploitation, and the price of being underestimated. Every scene feels polished with a sharp black edge, like a medical instrument under nightclub lighting. American Mary is not for viewers looking for safe horror. It is for people who want something cold, strange, and unforgettable, a movie that leaves you wondering who the real monsters are. Number 10. God Bless America, 2011. This is the kind of movie that laughs, then immediately asks if you should feel guilty for laughing. God Bless America follows Frank, a bitter and terminally ill man who has had enough of cruelty, stupidity, and fame-obsessed culture. Instead of quietly disappearing, he teams up with a rebellious teenager named Roxy, and the two begin a violent road trip against the loudest, ugliest parts of modern society. Directed by Bobcat Goldthwait, the film is not subtle, and it does not want to be. It is angry, absurd, uncomfortable, and often shockingly funny in a way that makes the viewer question where the joke ends and the warning begins. Joel Murray gives Frank a tired, wounded quality, so the character never feels like a cartoon, while Tara Lynn Barr brings manic energy that keeps the story moving like a match near gasoline. What makes this movie wild is its dangerous emotional honesty. Many films mock pop culture from a safe distance, but this one storms into the room and starts yelling. It is messy, provocative, and built to divide people, which is exactly why it belongs here. God Bless America is not just dark comedy, it is a pressure cooker disguised as entertainment. Number 9. Bronson, 2008. Bronson does not introduce a criminal, it introduces a performance that refuses to stay inside human limits. Tom Hardy plays Michael Peterson, a real-life prisoner who transforms himself into the violent alter ego Charles Bronson, and the result feels less like a traditional biopic and more like a one-man circus held inside a prison cell. Director Nicholas Winding Refn does not tell the story with ordinary realism. He turns Bronson's life into a theatrical explosion of rage, comedy, music, silence, and sudden violence. Hardy is astonishing because he makes the character terrifying, ridiculous, magnetic, and strangely tragic all at once. One moment he is posing like a stage performer, the next he is turning confinement into combat. The wildness comes from the movie's style as much as its subject. It is not interested in explaining everything neatly or asking the audience to approve of anyone. Instead, it traps you inside the mind of a man who seems to crave attention as much as freedom. The prison walls become his stage, his body becomes his costume, and violence becomes his language. Bronson is loud, strange, and impossible to ignore, the kind of film that feels like being locked in a room with someone who wants the spotlight more than survival. Number 8. The Loved Ones, 2009. A rejected prom invitation has never sounded more harmless or ended more horribly. The Loved Ones begins with the kind of teenage setup that could belong to a dark coming-of-age drama. A troubled boy, a school dance, and a classmate who wants one perfect night. Then the movie takes that familiar idea, locks it in a nightmare room, and turns teenage disappointment into pure horror insanity. Xavier Samuel plays Brent, a grieving student who says no to Lola, played with terrifying sweetness by Robin McLeavy. That one refusal becomes the spark for a twisted private celebration where balloons, music, glitter, and family devotion are used like weapons. Director Sean Byrne gives the film a nasty Australian edge, mixing emotional damage with cruel suspense and moments so bizarre they almost feel like a sick joke whispered in the dark. What makes The Loved Ones so wild is how it weaponizes innocence. Prom night fantasy becomes torture theater madness, and Lola is not just angry, she is theatrical, spoiled, and dangerously convinced that love means ownership. The movie works because it never feels like ordinary slasher material. It has style, tension, black comedy, and a villain who feels unforgettable without needing a mask. Every scene tightens around Brent like a trap, while the bright colors and party details make the horror feel even more disturbing. This is not a movie that politely scares you. It smiles, offers you a dance, and then reminds you that the most dangerous people are sometimes the ones who think they deserve your heart. Number 7. Trainspotting, 1996. Some films show rebellion as cool. Trainspotting shows it as funny, filthy, hypnotic, and finally devastating. Danny Boyle's cult classic follows Mark Renton and his circle of friends through the chaotic drug scene of Edinburgh, but calling it a drug movie barely explains why it still hits so hard. This is a film with the speed of a music video, the bite of black comedy, and the emotional weight of people trying to escape themselves while pretending they are choosing freedom. Ewan McGregor gives Renton a dangerous charm, making him witty enough to follow and broken enough to fear for. Around him, characters like Sick Boy, Spud, Tommy, and Begbie create a world that feels alive, hilarious, violent, and doomed all at once. What makes Trainspotting wild is its refusal to behave responsibly in the usual movie way. It seduces you with energy, jokes, music, and unforgettable visual style, then suddenly pulls the floor away and shows the cost hiding underneath. The film's famous "choose life" attitude is not just a slogan, it is a bitter dare from people who know how easy it is to waste one. Boyle turns dirty apartments, clubs, streets, and withdrawal nightmares into a cinematic rush that feels impossible to slow down. It is shocking without being empty, stylish without being shallow, and funny in ways that make the pain sharper. Trainspotting belongs on this list because it does not simply tell a story about chaos. It makes chaos feel like a rhythm, then asks whether anyone can survive dancing to it. Number 6. Mandy, 2018. Mandy does not feel like a movie you watch. It feels like a fever dream you survive. At first, it appears to be a strange, slow-burning love story about Red and Mandy, two outsiders living in a quiet forest world far away from normal life. Then a cult enters the frame, reality begins to rot, and the film transforms into a neon-soaked revenge nightmare. Nicolas Cage plays Red with a kind of grief that looks ready to explode through his skin, and when the story finally turns, it becomes one of the most outrageous emotional detonations in modern genre cinema. Director Panos Cosmatos builds the film like a heavy metal album cover brought to life, full of crimson skies, distorted faces, shadowy rituals, and violence that feels less realistic than mythic. The wildness of Mandy is not just in its revenge plot, it is in the mood, the sound, the colors, the strange pauses, and the sense that the whole movie is taking place somewhere between a nightmare and a cursed painting. Andrea Riseborough gives Mandy an almost ghostly presence, making her more than just a symbol of loss. She becomes the soul of the movie, the calm before everything burns. By the time Red descends into rage, the film has already pulled you into its strange logic. Mandy is not clean, quick, or ordinary. It is hypnotic, brutal, surreal, and darkly beautiful. A movie for viewers who want something that does not just cross the line, but melts the line down and turns it into a weapon. Number 5. Mulholland Doctor, 2001. Hollywood has sold many dreams, but Mulholland Doctor feels like the dream woke up angry. David Lynch begins with a familiar mystery. A woman survives a car crash, loses her memory, and crosses paths with an aspiring actress newly arrived in Los Angeles. That sounds like the start of a sleek noir puzzle, but Lynch is not interested in giving you a normal puzzle. He gives you clues that shimmer, characters who feel doubled, scenes that seem funny until they turn frightening, and a city where ambition slowly becomes a trap. Naomi Watts is extraordinary because her performance changes shape with the film itself. At first she seems bright, hopeful, almost innocent. Then the movie begins to darken, and that optimism becomes something much more painful. Laura Herring brings mystery and glamour, while the film's strange side characters make every corner of Los Angeles feel haunted by failure, desire, and illusion. What makes Mulholland Doctor so wild is that it attacks the viewer's need for clean answers. It is seductive, confusing, glamorous, frightening, and emotionally cruel in ways that keep unfolding long after the credits. The famous dream logic is not random. It feels like a cracked mirror reflecting the cost of wanting to be loved by an industry built on rejection. This is not wild in the loud, explosive sense. It is wild because it quietly rewires your brain while pretending to tell a mystery. Mulholland Doctor is the kind of film that makes you lean forward, doubt yourself, and wonder whether the scariest monster in Hollywood is not failure, but the fantasy that keeps pulling people back. Number 4. The Descent, 2005. The worst place to lose control is underground, and The Descent understands that fear better than almost any horror film of its era. It begins with a group of women entering an unexplored cave system for what should be an adventurous escape, but from the first narrow passage, the movie starts squeezing the air out of the room. Neil Marshall does not rely only on creatures to create terror. He uses darkness, tight stone walls, panic, grief, mistrust, and the unbearable feeling of being trapped where no one can hear you. Shauna Macdonald plays Sarah, a woman already carrying emotional trauma before the cave becomes a physical nightmare, and that personal pain gives the film a sharper edge than simple monster horror. The group dynamic is just as important as the threat lurking in the dark. Friendships crack, secrets surface, survival instincts turn ugly. By the time the danger fully reveals itself, the audience is already trapped in a psychological collapse. What makes The Descent so wild is its combination of claustrophobia and brutality. The camera often makes you feel like the walls are closing around your own chest, while the sound design turns every breath, scrape, and distant echo into a warning. The movie is terrifying because it removes comfort one layer at a time: light, space, trust, direction, and finally hope. It is not just about what lives in the cave. It is about what fear does to people when escape becomes almost impossible. The Descent earns its place here because it delivers horror with muscle, emotion, and a merciless grip that refuses to loosen. Number 3. Oldboy, 2003. Revenge stories usually promise satisfaction. Oldboy turns revenge into a poisoned meal and makes you watch every bite. Park Chan-wook's film begins with a nightmare setup that is instantly unforgettable. Oh Dasu is kidnapped, locked in a private room for years, and released without knowing who imprisoned him or why. From there, the movie becomes a furious search for answers, but every answer feels more dangerous than the question. Choi Min-sik gives a fearless performance, making Dae-soo pathetic, terrifying, wounded, funny, and desperate, sometimes all within the same scene. The film moves with the elegance of a thriller and the cruelty of a Greek tragedy, mixing stylized violence, dark humor, mystery, and emotional collapse into something that feels completely its own. What makes Oldboy wild is not only its famous shocks, but the control behind them. Park Chan-wook turns hallways, restaurants, elevators, and ordinary rooms into stages for obsession. The action is memorable, but the real weapon is the story's design. It keeps pulling Dae-soo and the viewer toward a truth that feels worse than ignorance. This is a movie about punishment, memory, manipulation, and the terrible human need to understand pain. It is stylish enough to impress you, strange enough to unsettle you, and tragic enough to linger like a bruise. Oldboy belongs near the top because it does what the wildest films do best. It does not just shock for a moment. It changes the emotional temperature of the room, then leaves you sitting there, quietly realizing the trap was bigger than you thought. Number 2. Eden Lake, 2008. Some horror films scare you with monsters. Eden Lake scares you with people who feel horribly possible. The story begins with a couple, Jenny and Steve, trying to enjoy a quiet weekend by a remote lake. It should be simple: a little peace, a little romance, a break from ordinary stress. Then, a group of aggressive teenagers invades that calm, and the movie begins its brutal slide from social discomfort into survival terror. James Watkins directs the film with a realism that makes it hard to relax. There is no supernatural curse, no masked legend, no fantasy explanation that lets the viewer feel safe. The fear comes from escalation. One insult becomes a confrontation, one confrontation becomes violence, and soon everyone is trapped inside a situation that no longer has a reasonable exit. Kelly Reilly gives Jenny a performance full of fear, endurance, and disbelief, while Michael Fassbender's Steve makes the early tension feel painfully human. What makes Eden Lake so wild is how ordinary the nightmare looks before it becomes unbearable. A sunny outdoor trip becomes a maze of panic, and the film keeps asking how quickly civilized behavior can disappear when cruelty becomes a group activity. It is tense, angry, and deeply uncomfortable because it touches a fear many viewers recognize: being outnumbered, unheard, and far from help. Eden Lake is not fun in the easy sense. It is gripping because it feels too close to reality, and that is exactly why it is impossible to ignore. By the end, the wildness is not loud spectacle. It is the cold realization that the scariest place may be where nobody believes you are in danger. Number 1. The Substance, 2024. A movie about beauty should not feel like an alarm bell, but The Substance turns vanity, fame, and self-hatred into a full-body cinematic scream. Coralie Fargeat's film follows Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, a former star pushed aside by an industry that worships youth until it becomes cruel. Then comes the offer, a mysterious treatment that promises a better, younger version of the self. From that idea, the movie unleashes one of the most outrageous body horror nightmares of recent cinema. Margaret Qualley appears as Sue, the dazzling younger double, but the film is not simply about becoming young again. It is about the violence of being told your value has an expiration date. What makes The Substance so wild is how boldly it refuses subtlety. The colors are loud, the satire is sharp, the imagery is grotesque, and the emotional core is painfully recognizable. Dennis Quaid's television executive adds a cartoonishly ugly face to an already brutal system, turning show business into a meat grinder with studio lights. The film is shocking, but the shock has purpose. It exaggerates the cruelty of beauty culture until the exaggeration starts to feel honest. Every transformation, every bargain, and every consequence pushes the viewer deeper into a world where the body becomes both product and prison. The substance earns the #1 spot because it is stylish, disgusting, funny, furious, and strangely tragic all at once. It is the rare, wild movie that gives viewers exactly what the title promises: something impossible to ignore, impossible to forget, and almost impossible to watch without reacting. And that is the danger of wild cinema. It does not ask for your permission before it gets under your skin. Some of these films shock you, some confuse you, and some make you laugh at the worst possible moment, but none of them feel safe. So pick one this weekend, press play, and see how long it takes before you realize you are not watching the movie anymore. The movie is watching you.